Welcome everyone to the Preschool Mindfulness Summit. Really excited to introduce you to Jennifer Cohen Harper. She comes to us from Little Flower Yoga. She's an educator and an author, and she supports children in the development of their inner resources through mindfulness and yoga. She has all kinds of tools that she's developed, such as the yoga and mindfulness activity and coloring book. She has cards, which you can see some behind her there. And she is going to talk to us today about a topic that both of us are very passionate about, which is managing anxiety with mindfulness and movement. So welcome, Jennifer, and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy that this is happening, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it.
Yeah, thank you. So Jennifer's kindly given us a freebie, which is our 5 favorite practices for preschoolers. So that's got worksheets and instructions that you can download on the freebie button. And if you click on her speaker bio, you can find a link to her books and tools and her social media and website. So check those out. So Jennifer, tell us why we see this anxiety happening more and more. So why do such young kids develop anxiety?
Yeah, it's such a good and important question, is this question, right, of why do these very young children, even in seemingly wonderful situations, experience so much anxiety? And, of course, the reasons that kids experience anxiety are as varied as kids themselves are. But what I've learned over the years is that oftentimes anxiety in young children comes down to a few things, right? A few categories of things. One is, and this will be no surprise to anyone, overstimulation. Right? So overstimulation is a major cause of anxiety in young children. And in overstimulation, I include things like lack of predictability and an inability to know what's coming next in their day-to-day life, confusion about where they're supposed to be and what's happening to them. Right? So we've got overstimulation. And then we have disconnection, right? And I really think that overstimulation and disconnection in many ways are the core drivers of anxiety, right? Disconnection from the self and disconnection from other people. And any underlying nervousness, frustration, fear is amplified, is magnified by overstimulation and disconnection. So when I think about addressing anxiety in young children, those are the things that I want to tackle first. And then once we explore what's happening with overstimulation and disconnection, we might be able to kind of reach for the threads of the more specific situations that are happening for each child.
Yeah, and I noticed, working as you have for many years with kids, if it seems like it's becoming more and more common for kids to feel this this anxiety. So, I mean, probably technology is probably one reason. What do you think are some of the reasons why that's happening?
I think technology is a tremendous one. And, I think that we maybe underestimate the impact of adult technology use on young children, especially very young children. And I think exposing young children to technology certainly increases overstimulation, but adults around them using technology and young children always having sort of a sense that maybe their needs, their desires to be seen and recognized and engaged with are second on the list, or that they have to fight for that, or they have to fight for that connection. That's a big problem. And look, I see it with my own daughter. I have 2 daughters, a 6-year-old and an almost 2-year-old. And I say this stuff, I talk about this stuff, and I still struggle with it in my own home, right? But I can clearly see when I step back, the clear connection with even my own kids, much less the kids I work with, between my presence, which is most often pulled away by technology, right? It's the thing that's easiest to get sucked into, and it's the thing that they don't understand, right? If someone else walks in the room and says hello to me and I turn around and say hello, I might have taken my attention off the kids, but they can still be part of that dynamic.
Yeah.
If I'm on a phone or a computer or a device, what are they left to think? But like, there's something more important than me in there.
Yeah.
And for young children, their safety depends on the adult in charge of them, putting them first. Right, that's a safety issue for young kids. So of course, anxiety goes up in that situation. And now this is just the soup our kids live in. Right, the technology's everywhere. Attention is fragmented. Many of us work from home or bring work home, so we can assume that a lot of our students are in that situation where they're having to fight for attention that I think in the past, certainly there were challenges, but this is a new phenomenon. And I think we're going to see more and more that as we can learn how to manage our relationship with technology, our kids are going to benefit.
Yeah, it's a huge issue. And I think as well, there's kind of an awareness coming in that, you know, we need to look at how we manage it, as you say. So what are some of the things that parents or teachers might do, or adults working with kids, that sometimes they unintentionally they make the child's anxiety worse?
Yeah. Don't we want to know? So of course we, none of us want to exacerbate this situation. So, you know, the first thing to remind ourselves of is connecting with children, giving them our full attention and our presence is always helping, even if it doesn't feel like it's solving the problem in the immediate moment. Right? I think sometimes what happens is anxiety starts to rise, and instead of thinking, how can I connect with this child, we're thinking, how can I get rid of this anxiety? Or how can I get rid of the behavior that the anxiety is causing? Or how can I deal with my own anxiety because I'm escalating with the kid, right? So for me, you know, all of those things, when we try to go right to the behavior, or when we try to like shut the kid down because we can't handle our own feeling, we're inadvertently making it worse, right? When we sort of disassociate because we're freaked out, we're making it worse, right? Because we're exacerbating the disconnection. When we try to distract a kid with like, okay, you're freaking out, you're upset, so here's a toy, here's a game, here's a cookie, here's an iPad, we're adding to the stimulation, right? So we're inadvertently making it worse. Mm-hmm. So from my perspective, this of course is when we need our own mindfulness practice the most, right? So that we can say, okay, this is the child's experience. I may not know exactly what's causing it right now, but I can be sure if this is happening, there's a degree of disconnection and overstimulation, right? And what's my experience of that? And can I take a beat and use my practice so that I can stay anchored, so that I can be a calm space, right? So that I can share my calm, so that I can share my steadiness, because most importantly, I want the kids that I work with and my own children to know I'm not afraid of their anxiety, right? Because if I'm afraid of it, they're afraid of it. So that to me is the first priority, right? Don't make things worse by acting like this is some horrible thing that is freaking everyone out and we need to get rid of, right? It's like this anxiety is a normal part of life, right? Everyone has it. Oftentimes it's functional, right? Anxiety can give us information, can help us see things that are important to us, right? Anxiety is a normal, functional human emotion. Of course, it can become maladaptive and cause suffering, needless suffering. But for me, to avoid making things worse, I want to stay anchored to my own practice. And I want to immediately think, how can I make this child feel more connected to me, feel my presence before I think about doing anything? And often for me, that involves sitting lower than the kid, right? Our nervous system is looking for threats when our anxiety is rising, and anyone looking down at you is a threat. And everyone's always looking down at kids. So one of the things I do right away is I stabilize myself and I get low, even if that means sitting on the floor. Sometimes it might mean laying down on the floor next to a kid who's having a tantrum or who's really overwhelmed. But I find if I can get really low, if I can keep my nervous system in check, and then I just look for little openings, not to fix it, but to say, I'm right here. I see how hard this is for you. I'm right here with you. Then we can start to de-escalate and then address things from there.
Yeah. Wow, yeah, really powerful message there. And I know, we're all hopefully coming from a good intention, but as you say, sometimes, we see that all the time, right? Both parents trying to hand a toy or just fix it, just fix it. So I love what you're saying about the connection and getting down on the same level as the child. And just being there, yeah, so important. So
most of us never learned how to deal with our own anxiety well.
Exactly. So that brings me to the next thing I want to talk about. So do you think is there a difference between adults' anxiety and children's anxiety?
I think that there's a lot of similarities, but I think one of the big differences is that anxiety is much more confusing to children. Right? They don't have life experience. They don't have that fully developed prefrontal cortex. They don't have years of perspective. And for children, especially our young children or preschool age children, these big emotional experiences that then manifest in the body, they don't know what they are, right? So some of the things that we do in our work, and we're always talking about that our work is the work of embodied mindfulness, is helping kids recognize what's happening physically, what these body sensations are, what they mean, so that they're not so scared of them, right? So that they can interpret the messages of their body and understand that these things are normal, even if they're uncomfortable. I think the confusion factor is huge. And then we also have to deal with the reality that kids have a lot less self-determination than adults. Even though we often feel as adults that we don't have as much maybe self-determination as we would like, there's a lot that we get to decide for ourselves. And kids often are in situations where they can't mentally prepare for what's coming. They can't choose to back away from something that's causing them anxiety. There's, I think, in childhood in general, even if things are going reasonably well, sometimes a strong sense of being trapped. I don't think that kids would say it in that way. But that's what it is, right? You don't get to choose where you go and when and who's there and what happens to you. You don't get to say peace out, this isn't working for me, right? Often you don't even get to choose, sometimes you don't even get to choose when to go to the bathroom and when to get a drink of water. So, this combination of confusion and then not being able to really feel empowered and make choices is a particularly difficult combination for our young kids.
It's so important. I think when we kind of get in our own world and busy and thinking about things from the child's perspective, that lack of choice sometimes, and because especially in preschools, I think we still see a lot of like you said, it's toilet time. Everybody's going now, whether you want to or not, and all these different situations. So when we see a child that's feeling anxious, you talked a little bit about it, but what are some specific things that we can say to a child that could help them when they're clearly experiencing anxiety?
I think there's a few. I think it depends in some part on where the kid's at and what's happening, and if they can hear you. So if they're in a place where they can't hear your words, right, then it's about your actions, right, which we talked about a little bit before. But when a kid is in a place where they've settled a little bit, there are some things that I think are really helpful. One is orienting practices, right? So sometimes that can help a kid from getting so escalated, but can also help on the way down is where am I? What's going on, right? A lot of anxiety is stories in our head, right? So practices like checking in with your five senses. What can you see? What can you smell? What can you feel? What can you taste, right? Are practices that help the mind go, okay, I know where I am right now. And I'm safe where I am right now, right? So orienting and then grounding, right? Physically grounding. So things even some deep squats, right? Coming in and oftentimes we'll bring our elbows to the knees and push our hands together and get really low and just feel our feet, feel the ground. Grounding practices that also help connect you to your own body. So simple things like tapping, right? So like, hey, here I am, right? We do this where we like tap down the arms and tap down the whole body. And it's a way of generating a little bit of physical sensation that's different, right? There's kind of a loop that we go through in anxiety, and it can go in multiple directions. But I always think like there's basically 3 parts to anxiety. There's what I'm thinking in my head, there's what I'm feeling in my body, and there's what I'm doing, my actions, right? And if we can change any one of those 3 things, we have a good shot at changing the other 2. As adults, we often think I got to change what's going on in my head so that I can act differently, so that I can feel differently. Do you know how hard it is to change what's happening in your head, even for adults? Right? But for young children, we can use the body to tell the mind a different story about what we're experiencing, about our safety, about our competence, right? So when we change the input, right, we can do power poses, strong, like warrior poses, big, make ourselves big, make our bodies big. We send our mind a different message about who we are and our capability. We create a different set of physical sensation, right? That starts to say, okay, this like discomfort in my belly, this like tingling, this rapid heartbeat, all the physical symptoms of anxiety, they're not the only thing happening right now, right? So when we use movement to change the sensations that the body is experiencing, that can help influence our mindset, which in turn, of course, changes our behavior. I also talk to kids, even young kids, about the idea of what does it feel like to be a helper? And of course, this doesn't work in the sort of most escalated ways. But when we start talking about ongoing practices to really work with kids around anxiety, I do talk even with young kids about these 3 things, like what we say to ourselves, what we think, what we feel in our body, and what we do, right? And sometimes when we change what we do, we tell our mind a different story about who we are, right? So a lot of anxiety is also rooted in like not being sure that you're up to the challenges of life. But when you can help other people, even in small ways, and often we do this with partner yoga, right? So we actually practice with our little preschoolers. We do partner work where we practicing like, can I help you with that? Thank you so much for helping me with that. And we really ask them to explore, what did it feel like to be the helper? What did it feel like to be helped? And that's really, I think, an overlooked part of helping build that resilience so that anxiety is not so close to the surface, is giving young children really powerful ways to recognize their own competence and how capable they are of making a contribution to their community.
Wow, really powerful information there, and great strategies to help kids. What Jennifer, what if you're dealing with a situation where a child's like right in the throes of anxiety, having a panic attack or something? What would you suggest then?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's really a 2-part answer, right? One is, when I'm faced with this type of question, I often think of the expression, you can't teach someone to swim while they're drowning, right? Like, it's a mistake to think you can use these practices in an extreme situation if that child doesn't have a tremendous amount of exposure and integration of the practice. Right? So there's 2 situations here. There's a kid who has a lot of experience with the practices, who maybe you've been working with, or it's your own kid. And now in this moment of really heightened anxiety, maybe even panic, those practices are accessible because they're in that child deeply, right? If you're working with a child in that situation, then breathwork practices and body holds are my go-to. So if you can breathe with that child, count with that child, or give them something, let them anchor to your voice, right? Count the breaths with them. If it's your own child, if it's my own child, sometimes I'll sit behind her and put a hand on her heart and a hand on her belly. That's not always appropriate, but if it is, right? And if they'll let you, right, that's a very secure, I'm here, you're not alone, and we're going to steady our breath together. And then what happens is that child can feel you breathing on their back, right? So you can sync the rhythm together. And it's a way of telling that child's nervous system directly, like, there's no danger here. Okay? to me, everything else comes after that, right? Everything else comes after that. Now, if it's not your own child, what can often give a little bit of contact without the intimacy is back-to-back breathing. But I don't like where you sit back-to-back. A lot of kids really like that. The only thing is, if I'm the only adult there in the room, I don't like to do that because there's also the risk of that kid feeling like I'm disconnected. Right. So like it's just feeling out the situation. Like, is that going to feel like more connection, or is that going to feel like I'm not looking at you and I'm getting away from you?
Yeah.
Right? If you're working with a kid who hasn't had these practices really embedded in their life, then often it might backfire to say like, okay, let's slow your breath down, and I'm going to count these breaths for you, and put one hand on your heart, one hand on your belly, or give yourself a big hug. You run the risk of the kid having no idea what you're talking about, being even more confused, giving more stimulation, right? Because now this is new, unfamiliar input that they need to process, and kind of heightening the anxiety. And the first thing that I do in that situation is what I mentioned before: get low, make a little eye contact, but make sure it's not aggressive eye contact, and really reinforce this idea that I'm here. You're safe. Even if the kid's like, go away, I hate you. I'm right here. I hear you. I won't touch you. I don't even need to look at you if you don't want me to, but I'm going to stay here and keep you safe. Right. And even if the kid's like, I don't want you, it's like, I know, I won't touch you, right? I won't talk to you. And of course, part of you as the adult, like even me as I'm saying this, part of me is like, you don't want me? Great, peace out. Because it's so hard that there's a tiny part, I think, of us that's like almost relieved when the kid doesn't want us to engage, because then we don't have to know what to do, right? But they don't really want us to leave. They just want to say, I don't need anything, I don't want anything. Because if you don't know that you have something, it's scary to want it. And so reinforcing that. Yeah, I know. It's an emotional thing. And I think sometimes we underestimate the capacity of our young children to have a full and complete spectrum of thoughts and feelings. You know, we interact with kids in ways that we never, ever would with another loved one, with a parent or a sibling or a partner. And I think it's a big mistake. And I think we suffer for it too, because we create relationship dynamics that are harder than they need to be, that drain us of energy instead of filling us up with joy, right? And for me, I knew some of this stuff through my work, but it never hit home until I had my own kids and realized, wow, like I can suffer in relationship with my children, or I can be inspired and filled with joy through relationship with my children. And that's really my choice, right? It's really my choice. And the fact that they're going to have anxiety and tantrums and horrible days and not like me, that's a given. Right? Like that's just, as long as I can accept that that's normal, and understand my own feelings about it, then I know exactly what to do, right? I do know what to do if I can remember what my role is and what their role is, right? And their role is to experiment with everything that life has to offer, because that's what you do when you're 3 or 4 or 5, right? You feel every feeling, you say everything that comes to your mind. It's all one big experiment. Like, what is this life? Who am I? What do other people do if I do this or that? That's your job when you're 4, right? And my job is to be the grown-up, right? And say, that is your experience right now. I don't have to take on your experience. I can be present and helpful and secure the area, secure the boundaries for you so you're safe while you're having that experience. But I can't do any of that if I'm taking on the emotions of the child.
Yes, and that brings us to, our own mindfulness practice as teachers, as parents. So can you just talk a little bit about how I'm pretty sure you think it's important, like I do.
Yes. Yeah. I think as a parent, as a teacher, as anyone who works with children, it's really important to have a practice, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal mindfulness practice, but that is one that really works. It's really important to have a practice of self-reflection, and a practice that pushes you to explore uncomfortable emotions in yourself, because you cannot helpfully engage with children who are having a hard time if you're not very clear about what that's likely to make you feel and how you can manage it in the moment. Right? So having your own mindfulness practice, being able to pause and recognize like exactly what is happening in your own body and say, okay, I take a break. And you can model it for your kids, the kids you work with, the kids you live with. You can model, I'm not gonna be my best self right now. So I'm gonna just take a few moments. If you wanna do this with me, you can, right? Whatever it is. But having that kind of anchor is really important. And I find that self-talk is a big part of this with kids. And one of the things that has helped me tremendously is saying over and over again, this child isn't giving me a hard time, this child is having a hard time. And like, if I have any mantra in life in relation with children, it's that one. And it's been for like 15 years I've been working on that one, and just from like when I started teaching and like just saying it over and over again, and with my own kids, this child is not giving me a hard time, this child is having a hard time. Mm-hmm. And it does change the perspective, and it does engage the compassion muscle in a different kind of way. So that's been an important practice for me. And sometimes I need to practice more than others, right? If you're struggling to do it in the moment, what you can do is, if you're taking some time and sitting, you can actually bring these situations to mind, the ones that enraged you or freaked you out or scared you or got you escalated in a way that you don't think was helpful. You can bring these situations to mind, imagine them, replay them in your mind, and say, this child isn't giving me a hard time, this child is having a hard time. Right? And imagine how things might have gone differently. Right? And build that capacity on your own, not just in the moment with the kids.
Yeah, I love that. I love your mantra. I think that is so great to, it's so easy to get caught up and feel overwhelmed when, especially when you're in a class and all kinds of things are happening all over the place. And really great mantra to keep in mind. So Jennifer, just before we finish today, is there any last thoughts or ideas that you'd like to share with everyone watching about this topic?
Yeah, thank you. There is one more thing that I think is important to share, which is that I think we hold ourselves to very, very high standards, those of us who do this work with children. And I think it's also important to remember that when we do the hard work of creating really safe relationships with kids, where they know beyond a shadow of a doubt that we love them and care for them and see them and want to be there for them, when we have those safe relationships, it actually isn't the end of the world if things go sideways sometimes, right? And I think that what I try to remind myself is that, where are my kids going to learn that having an argument or a disagreement doesn't mean the relationship is tanked? Like, where are they going to learn that other than with me, And so I really try to be gentle with myself when I feel like I didn't do something quite the way I hoped, or I didn't hold myself, I didn't act up to that standard that I hold myself to. I try not to just right? And instead I think okay, what might my child have learned from this? And is there something that I can do now, after this interaction, to kind of close the loop on that, to make sure that we're both getting from it what is potentially a teachable moment, right? That, okay, that didn't go so great. I feel yucky, you feel yucky, right? What do we do now, right? You doing okay? I'm right. So I do recommend thinking when things don't go well, right? Say your kid is really struggling, having a lot of anxiety, and you're just like, okay, you're screaming at me and want me to leave, I will, right? And leave them alone in it. There's a lot of room there to beat yourself up. But you can also actually take that situation and make it into a different kind of learning experience for your kid. Just don't let it be the only learning experience.
Yeah, I love that. And you're so right. We do tend to, beat ourselves up a bit and think, oh, why did I do that? And I should know better. And so I love, and none of us are perfect. We're all learning and growing, I think. And I love what you said about, changing that perspective and learning from it yourself, and also helping your kids learn that, closing the loop, as you said, showing them that sometimes things don't go perfectly well, and but knowing that you're still there, and from that consistency of that you've built up over time. So really, really great points, Jennifer. So thank you so much again for sharing so many great practical strategies and ideas that I'm sure are going to help all the parents and preschool teachers watching today. And just remind you about Jennifer's book, Yoga and Mindfulness Activity and Coloring Book, which we have the link to. And you can find lots of other ideas on her website, and her freebie has lots of activities on there that you can try and do with your own children or with your class. So thanks again, Jennifer, for coming on the Preschool Summit.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.